is the Pro America Report with Ed Martin.
Welcome back. Ed Martin here on the Pro America Report. Our old friend Mark Mix, he's the president of the National Right to Work Committee. 2.8 million members in that public policy organization, one of the more extraordinary successes over the last 30 or 40 years. He's also the president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. And Mark, welcome back. How are you?
Ed, I'm doing great. Thank you. Happy New Year to you, and glad to be with you.
Thank you. Before we get to some of the stuff that we were seeing about the senators and the Democrat senators threatening automakers, what do you make when you see the Teamsters president going to meet with Trump? I know we're early in the process in terms of the primary and all, but it's something of a signal. Can you read the tea leaves more for me?
Yeah, well, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. That's wisdom from history. And frankly, the Teamsters have played footsies with Republican candidates for president going back decades, as you remember, Ed, obviously.
Yes.
Not that you're that old, but historic. I know you know history. Yeah. And so this is a classic example of kind of Lucy in the football, where Teamster union officials, Jackie Presser, no matter who it was, would go to the Republican president and say, hey, we're on your team. We might endorse you. And the fact of the matter is that Trump and his people, if they fall for this, are missing the dramatic chasm between union officials and rank and file workers. The fact that Sean O'Brien, the Teamster president, who's a thug from Boston, Massachusetts, and there's plenty of evidence to indicate that, is speaking for the rest of the Teamsters and all those people. It's just not true. I mean, the Teamsters, the rank and file workers, believe in the agenda that President Trump brought to the table in 2016. They will support his agenda in 2024. And I can tell you this, I highly doubt the Teamster unions will be endorsing candidate for President Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, part of it is Lucy with the football. I mean, that seems to me to be the best thing to say. But on the other hand, it also in a world where you have such a weak Democrat president and front runner, there's more room for making some noise. And it's a part of the creation here. I tell people all the time is making space for people to be able to have the positions that are best for them, public policy positions or political. And a lot of times they can't even get that space. I mean, that's, again, we're talking with Mark Mix, who year-long career, National Rights to Work Committee. Part of that is giving people a chance to not be silenced in the workplace. I mean, it is extraordinary. All right, 33 U.S. senators sent a letter on behalf of the United Auto Workers to non-union automakers, urging them to remain neutral. Now, why I guess other than being bullies, why does anybody care what 33 senators are saying if you're one of those companies?
Yeah, well, because there's a whole bunch of taxpayer money at stake under the so-called Inflation Reduction Act for, quote, clean energy policies. This is all about the electric vehicle transition. And if you're Ford and you're building a $6 billion blue oval city in Memphis, Tennessee, which happens to be a right-to-work state, those politicians from Michigan and the non-right-to-work states want to convince you that you ought to have a neutrality agreement when it comes to unionizing workers in those right-to-work states. I mean, all of the CEOs that are mentioned in this letter are running manufacturing facilities in the right-to-work states where the choice, you made the point at earlier, the choice is whether or not workers will choose voluntarily to join and financially support a labor union. What these senators want is they want to put a finger on the scale and say, look, if you're interested in any federal money to help you build out your new EV transition automobiles that are really stinkers, apparently, then you're going to need to provide minimum standards. Well, you should provide minimum standards. I'm using my finger quotes here, Ed. It's important. I can't see each other. But you should have a neutrality agreement as the minimum standard for how you're going to look at unionization of the workers of your facilities. Well, one of the reasons why these employers went to right-to-work states is because it's dramatically different to organize workers in a state where you can force them to pay union dues immediately upon them voting for unionization in a non-right-to-work state. But in a right-to-work state, you have to convince those workers to support you financially. So they want the federal government, the UAW wants these 33 senators to basically put their thumb on the scale saying, if you want any of this federal money for electric vehicle transition, then you're probably going to need to have these conditions. And one of those conditions at a minimum is a neutrality agreement where you agree not to say anything about unionization to your employees, whether it's good news or bad news. You shouldn't speak to your employees at all about bringing in a third party to the relationship you have.
Mark Mix again is our guest, and Mark he's the president of National Right to Work Committee, and one of the websites you can learn more about the work that they do is nrtw.org. Mark, are these neutrality agreements? Are they legally binding? Is this basically a way to, if you take one of these deals and you're in a right to work state, you're basically, if you gained 50 yards on the field by having right to work, you're given back 25 yards. And then are you bound to it? Can they, these enforceable things because if it's enforceable, it's a lot worse than it sounds. It's a bigger deal than it sounds.
Yeah. Well, the neutrality agreement, as they are portrayed, are a gentleman's agreement, if you will. Can I say that anymore?
I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know. And you correct me if I'm wrong here. But anyway, generally, I don't think they're legally enforceable because we actually litigated a case that went to the U.S. Supreme Court. We argued a case about basically companies are not allowed to give unions things of value to convince them. And boy, oh boy, should we recognize this with United Auto Workers, because one of the things that employers won't be able to tell their employees is that 14 top executives from the UAW went to jail for stealing union dues just 2 years ago. So that kind of information you think would be useful to an employee saying, hey, I want these people to represent me, when they still, their two former presidents were in jail for stealing money and embezzling and racketeering and these types of things that are criminal. And that comes as a result of compulsory unionism. So what they are basically is they're saying, if you want to participate in the federal distribution of this taxpayer money for EV transition, you probably should have this in place. If you don't have it, we just made it bypass your application for the money. So I think it's more bribery in the sense of the federal government and these senators saying, look, we're not going to approve any money to you unless you agree to these terms. Whether that's binding or not is another question. I suspect, like Elon Musk, he probably won't agree to this, and he speaks for himself publicly, but Tesla's done a pretty good job of surviving without it. And I think these other companies will too. But if we're going to be forced to transition to electric vehicles by 2032 or whatever that date is out there, this is pretty important because that infrastructure has to be built. And why not take money from the taxpayers if you can get it? If you're, one of these automobile companies going to build an EV factory or an assembly factory in a right to work state.
Mark Mix is our guest. And Mark, I agree. The only thing I wonder about it, we're talking about the situation where U.S. senators are banding together and pressuring companies that are in existing states like Tennessee, where they have right to work and they have a certain set of operating rules that they probably move to that state to undertake. One aspect of this that makes me somewhat hopeful, there's a lot of them, right? 13 non-union automakers. If it was 2 and the pressure could be ramped up, just on these 2, it feels like maybe they'll resist. Is the facts of life though, what I'm missing, Mark, that the money's too important? If you're a flailing company, I think of some of the American makers, but if you're flailing to do this transition to EV vehicles electric vehicles because it just doesn't work, it's not working financially, then any port in a storm. Is that the reality that we're worried about?
I think so, Ed, and that's a great point. We have one case study, I think, that came out of Atlanta, Georgia. It was a bus company. I think it was Bluebird Bus Company building electric buses. And they were a non-union facility in a right-to-work state. And they put in a bid to build electric buses. And the Department of Energy, I think, controlled that money, basically said there was $1 billion contract out there for electric buses, but we would encourage you to be unionized. And so they had a union vote, and the union won narrowly down there. I think it was I shouldn't say narrow, but they won. And, the unions touted as a huge election victory. But the fact is that $1 billion probably wouldn't have come to them contractually to build those buses if they hadn't had a union certification drive. Right. And so that's exactly what's going to happen here. Your point is spot on. It's kind of this, quote, inducement. And if you need the money, like I said, why not take it if it's offered? If all you have to do is zipper your mouth and say nothing about unionization, obviously the trouble begins after that, of course. But
well, and I'm reminded of one. I think it was the Walmart Effect, a book where they talked about how a number of mayors in the 1960s and 70s kept increasing pension benefits in their Democrat-run cities because they knew that the bill would come due after they were gone. And if you're some of these CEOs of these companies, you're saying to yourself, yeah, if it buys me a couple of years, I'll be out of here. And I think that kind of impact is also a factor. Well, Mark Mix, as always, appreciate you very much being out there on the front lines of this. Mark Mix, of course, is the president of the National Right to Work Committee, 2.8 million, almost 3 million members in that public policy organization. You hear a lot about the NRA and other groups. It's an amazing number of people that care about these issues, that understand them at National Right to Work Committee. National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation is also, he's the president of that. I'll put up on social media a link to their website, nrtw.org. You can find out more. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate you.
All right. We'll take a break, everybody, and come right back. Ed Martin here on the Pro America Report. Back in a moment.